tell us who you are and where you're from and so forth, and then we'll get going. But I'll start. I'm David Durfee. We met earlier. I'm the committee chair, and I represent Shaftesbury and Sunderland and Glastonbury down in Bennington County.
Heather Supernant, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, Bridgewater, and West Hartford.
Hi, I'm Esme Cole, Windsor 6 and Hartford, Vermont.
John O'Brien, Royalton and Tonbridge.
Hi, Chris. Represent the Bennington Rutland District. It's Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
David Templeman, Orleans 3, and represent Brownington, Barton, and Westwood.
Jed Lipsky, represent Lamoille 1, Town of Stowe.
Rodney Graham, represent Williamstown and Chelsea.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne Podheiser, and I live in St. Johnsbury, teach in Danville. So,
Have you been in here before?
you know me maybe from 7 Days. I was the food editor of 7 Days. Yeah, yep.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Actually, before we start too, we have another visitor who I'll just ask to introduce himself so that we all know.
I'm Nick Zanster. I'm from East Thompson, and I'm just visiting and checking out what goes on at State House, watching some sausage get made.
This is the perfect committee for me.
All right, we'll turn it over to you then, Susan.
Okay, so yeah, I'm here after having some conversations with Henry. And so yeah, I'm the part-time cooking teacher at Danville School. I teach 7th and 8th graders. Every 7th and 8th grader takes my cooking class, and the high schoolers have it as an elective. For the high schoolers, it's a double block class, so a third of their day, and it's a full semester class that I teach both semesters. This is a new position at Danville. It didn't exist in its current form until I kind of randomly encountered the former principal and he hired me. Before I tell you a little bit more about myself, I wanted to tell you an anecdote that happened yesterday because it's relevant, I think, to what we're going to talk about. We have our share of students who are often in the principal's office, and yesterday, one of those students and his friend came to me during lunch and asked me if they could have special permission to make waffles. And during the course of about 30 minutes, they got a recipe from me. They made homemade waffles. They made like 20 of them. They were running around gifting waffles to teachers, to other students. I didn't hear a swear word, which in this kid's presence is very uncommon. And they were just so proud of themselves. They said they're going to make waffles every single week now, and asked me if they could have permission to come back and do more cooking projects with me. So these are not my students. They've never had me in class, but just to see a kid who's usually kind of slouched in his chair with his hood over his head, being sullen, just like running around gifting waffles to people is really sweet. And so I think that's just kind of representative of what we're trying to do in our school is engage kids who might not otherwise be engaged, kind of connect academic subjects with hands-on subjects to kind of create more synergy in the school. So I was just really pleased to, and they were Mickey Mouse waffles too, so they were extra cute. But yeah, so my background, I was born in New York City and lived there till I was 5. And in that time, my parents didn't have a lot of money, but ethnic cuisines from all over the world was available and inexpensive where we lived. So I had tried a lot of different foods when I was very young. And when I was 5 in 1983, we moved to North Danville, Vermont, which has fewer restaurants than Brooklyn. And by a small one. So I couldn't have articulated it at the time, but I missed the flavors that I'd experienced. I used to eat potato knish and Peking duck and Greek food and Indian food. And so I actually taught myself to cook really young because I kind of wanted to be able to have those experiences again. So that early exposure really had a huge effect on me. So by the time I was 12, I had taught myself to cook from cookbooks and was making full meals for my family. It was just always a passion for me. I took a kind of non-traditional college path. I designed a degree at UVM called Interdisciplinary Food Studies. And this was before they had their food systems programs. So no one had ever done this at UVM before. But I wove together, I was in the English department with writing as a focus. but I wove together philosophy primarily. So I did a lot of food ethics. I took advertising classes, nutrition and food science. I took film classes and wrote about food in the movies. I took sociology and psychology and studied aspects of those that relate to food. So I was kind of trying to demonstrate that food touches everything else in our world and is relevant to everything else in our world, and that it's a worthy academic subject. Armed with my unusual degree, I was able to get a job at 7 Days newspaper when they decided to launch a food section in 2006. So I was 7 Days first food writer and then food editor. So in that role, I got to interview and meet and write about farmers, cheesemakers, cider pressers, chefs, everybody who was involved in the food system on any level, I got to cover. And so I got to kind of see from kind of an overlooking kind of viewpoint, kind of how the food systems in Vermont were tying together, which restaurants were using local ingredients and how they were doing it. What food products were really unique and winning awards, who was struggling. So it was really an interesting kind of eagle's eye view on the food system here. But eventually I felt like I wanted to be part of it instead of kind of looking at it. So I left 7 Days. I opened a restaurant in Montpelier called Salt Cafe. That was here from 2010 to 2015, where Undies is now on Berry Street, where Kismet was and then was again. So yeah, for 5 years, I had a restaurant down on Berry Street. So I got to feed a lot of your compatriots, and I used more than 80% local product in my restaurant. I only served local meat. There was never a time where I served a piece of meat that wasn't local in that restaurant. Local being the whole of the state. I guess I did serve some Hudson Valley duck a couple times when I couldn't get local duck, so I don't want to lie.
John Fazia.
I actually don't know. So yeah, 5 years spent kind of buying from farmers, tweaking my menu. I changed my menu every 3 weeks so that I could stick with what was available to me and in season. So in January through March, we used to not be able to get any local chicken. Maple Wind Farm was smaller at the time. No local chicken was available, so I just didn't serve chicken for a few months. So yeah, my menus were themed. They were silly. I would serve food from Lord of the Rings, and then I would serve what they ate at Monticello. That was Bill Doyle's favorite menu, the Monticello menu. He talked about it for years after. So yeah, I wanted to show that you could use mostly local products and keep your food interesting, make it diverse and unique, and support the local farmers. And so I would let the farmers tell me what they wanted me to take rather than saying, I need all your tenderloins. I would say, what do you have? And they would say, we have too much shank. And I would say, okay, we're putting shank on the menu. So kind of inverting the normal kind of farmer chef relationship was kind of my goal. After I closed Salt, I just felt like I learned everything I could. I definitely was not making money. I owned a goose farm for 3 years. So I raised and processed geese. We had 225 to 300 birds a year. We got grants, SARE grants for that, spoke at agriculture conferences about how to raise and process geese. So that was a little piece of my background. I was a co-owner of Woodbelly Pizza for a while. I've owned another catering company. And currently, in addition to teaching and being a freelance journalist, my partner and I are trying to create like a climate resilient market garden. So I'm planting native crops like wild rice and Jerusalem artichokes and high bush cranberry and things of that nature, and trying to grow them and then make recipes with them to help people figure out how to use those things. So we also grow mushrooms, the culinary kind, and a lot of vegetables as well. So that's my side project. So let's see what I missed here on my, so my class at school, it's not home economics, which doesn't take into account anything about seasonal or local. And it's also not kind of a culinary tech program. I'm not teaching kids to make, perfect lamb lollipop chops so that they can work in, on an airline restaurant or something like that. The idea is to, again, look to the local farms, see what's seasonal, and teach the kids to problem solve through the process of making food, modify recipes so that they, can take whatever they have and make healthy and interesting meals out of those things. So that's kind of how we do it in class. I don't have as specific a curriculum. I kind of treat each group of kids as a different entity, and I say, what are you interested in making? And if they say fresh pasta, then that's a direction we can go in for a while. So I try to let their passions inform how I teach, and then I try to fold in information about other subject areas as we go. But currently, my class is called like Cooking in the World of Food. So it's a little bit focused on the social studies angle in different countries. And next year, it's going to be like something in the lines of food and self-reliance. And we're going to do a lot of preserving and maybe even make some things in the wood shop for the cooking class, and just kind of think about how food and food preservation fits into a whole lifestyle. So that's kind of what I'm doing in Danville. And in my classroom, again, 100% local meat, all local dairy, and the eggs come from the school. We have our own flock of chickens. We do have a school garden. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And we make our own syrup. So all our syrup that we use is local syrup. So, oh yeah, they love competition. So every week I give them a different challenge, and they have one day where they cook against each other, and they love that. Really brings out the best in them. So yeah, before I continue, any questions so far?
There's a new Salt Bistro in St. Johnsbury.
Not related.
Okay,
No.
all right.
It just happens to be the same town, but
Same name.
yeah,
John?
Where was your goose farm?
it was in Cabot. Yeah. Up on Danville Hill Road.
For eggs, meat, hot
Meat, yeah. We sold birds to kind of the cream of the crop Vermont restaurants like Hen of the Wood and the Twin Farms, and so that's in your neck of the woods, right, Esme? Twin Farms bought our oh, yours, sorry. Mixed up the district. Misery Loves Company. They actually aged them with the heads on and the guts inside for like 48 days or something. That was,
Okay.
yeah. They're like, please bring us birds with the heads. Yeah, that's where my goose farm was.
Where they charge.
It takes a lot of money to, set aside a section of your walk-in for geese. So yeah, did you have a question?
I do. I have two. One is, this bill is particularly about accessing grant funding.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about how your school budget allows you or doesn't allow you to do what you want to do.
That is definitely on my list of things to.
Okay, maybe we'll get to that in a second.
I will totally get to that in a second.
My other question is just, I am so inspired by literally everything you said, but you said it was a side project, the garden that you're creating with the wild rice and the artichoke and
Yeah.
berries. And I'm just like, that is just such valuable knowledge to have, and to be able to incorporate those and teach others how to incorporate those local foods that thrive best in our world here. So I know it's just I don't know if it's a personal project or where exactly, if it's at your home or elsewhere, but
Yeah, it's at my home. As a writer, I'm hoping that once I have some information about it, I can articulate that in writing
Yeah.
or videos or
Yeah.
podcasts or something like that.
Beautiful, yeah, because I mean, just to share that knowledge and expertise with more people, including students, like would be just so wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm definitely hoping to loop the students into my home gardening situation over the next couple of years and kind of bring them in once I have that stuff established. So, yeah.
And, part of Henry's goal, I think too, is to be able to take, extremely knowledgeable folks like you and to be able to allow other districts and areas to access that information. And that puts a lot of, I suppose, pressure on you because you are one of those people who has this insight. But however we can be supportive in helping you document and carry out this information elsewhere would be something worth thinking about to make your life easier.
At the end of my kind of list of things to talk about, I have some kind of questions for the future, and I feel like those are going to lean towards some of the stuff that you're wondering about, that I'm wondering about too. So just some comments that I wanted to bring. I polled my high school class of 10 last semester, and 8 of them think raw tomatoes are disgusting.
No.
2 of those kids work on a farm and they will not eat tomatoes. One, I tried to get him to eat a cherry tomato from my garden. It was like a green, stripy, beautiful cherry tomato, and he spit it into his hand after he put it in his mouth. So, this is one of the challenges, right? That, kids who have eaten very specific, limited diets for their whole lives, by the time they get to high school, they have enough of their own kind of personality and drive that they don't want to try new things. So that feels a little late to me. Whereas my 7th and 8th graders are they're picky, but they're more flexible. And so I see the importance of getting food education to younger students so that they kind of are more willing to experiment as they grow up. So that's something I've noticed more strongly as I've gotten into teaching. Nutrition information is very lacking. They don't understand vitamins and minerals. They don't understand calories. They don't understand that the food they eat could cause them to feel better or worse throughout the day. That's just not part of the picture of what these particular students seem to understand. They struggle with reading comprehension and math when we're dealing with recipes. Even just kind of reading the steps of a recipe, they'll still kind of come to me and say, am I supposed to put the butter in the bowl with the flour? And I say, no, what does the recipe say? And they're like, I don't quite get what the recipe is telling me to do. So interpreting more complicated language is hard for these students, and kind of dividing 3/4 in half has been proving a particular challenge this week. So when they make something they're proud of, they really love to share it. And so that's one of my favorite things that I see is how excited they are to run around the school with a plate of sushi rolls that they made and share them with other people. So I see the cooking encouraging really positive pro-social behaviors. I particularly encourage them to try new things and to deviate from recipes when they want to, and tell them it's okay for them to make mistakes. So we're not trying to make a perfect cake. If they want to add strawberry jam to the batter, I say, okay, let's add strawberry jam to the batter. How are we going to do that? So focusing on problem solving instead of perfection, basically, but also asking them to respect the ingredients, again, because they're mostly local, but any ingredient should be, treated thoughtfully. So that's a big focus of the class. Yeah.
About the struggles this particular group of students you're expressing. What age group is that is struggling?
High school. Yeah, juniors and seniors primarily.
Dividing 3/4 by 2.
Yeah. That he was a sophomore, the kid who was particularly struggling with that this week. But
And does this curriculum help them overcome that?
It's more that when we encounter those things, we stop and we take a minute and we write it down and we say, okay, how do we divide this recipe in half and multiply the denominator by 2,
So theoretically, yes.
Theoretically, yes, but it's not. Since I'm kind of newer at this, I haven't had time. I don't get paid for enough hours outside of my teaching hours to actually develop a true curriculum. And so I just kind of deal with things as I encounter them each semester. So that's on the challenges list. I have one planning block per day that is 53 minutes long, but I teach a 7th grade class, an 8th grade class, and a high school class. So that gives me effectively like 20 minutes to plan each class, and that's not enough to really nail everything down. So I'm flying by the seat of my pants a lot. When polled, the middle school students say that cooking and shop are their 2 favorite classes. That's been consistent for the 2 semesters that I've been teaching them. And they want more cooking classes. They sometimes voluntarily come in when they would otherwise be able to have free time and do more cooking projects. So there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. And I see a lot of synergy with the other hands-on classes in our school. We're lucky enough to have a wood shop and an outdoor education teacher. And so we did a project where the wood shop built a cider press. The outdoor ed class harvested apples at Burt's Orchard in Cabot. And my class used the cider that they'd pressed to make a bunch of different things for prom, actually. We they'd canned it, so we were able to take it and use it when we catered prom. And so they had apple cider cupcakes and we had mulled apple cider. And that meant 50 different kids in that school had touched that process somewhere. And that was super cool to see. So I think when there are other hands-on classes, you can create these like longer chains of learning experiences and loop kids in different parts of it. So that's been really cool.
Representative O'Brien.
But the relationship you're building with these students and food in your class, how does that relate to like universal school meals, to what they're eating at home, or even what they, when they eat at Applebee's or McDonald's? Like, do they see like you're just a weird sort of island here? Or are they trying to
Yeah.
connect them?
So that's actually, I think, one of the challenges we're facing and something I want to maybe ask about tweaking a little tiny smidgen of wording in the bill. What I'm doing is not connected to what we're doing in our school lunch program. And we have some amazing people. Emily Snodgrass is working at the SU level, trying to get more local food into the school cafeterias in our SU, and is meeting a lot of resistance. As a caterer, I've noticed that there have been times when I've bought lettuce from a particular farm and it's perfectly clean and I don't have to do anything else to it and I can just serve it. There have been other times where that same farm's lettuce was a little bit dirty. Maybe it had rained, maybe they didn't have the same staffer washing it. And I've had to spend an hour kind of washing and spinning the lettuce. And in a school environment, you don't have time to adapt to dirty vegetables or poultry that has extra feathers on it. And so I think there are a lot of challenges with moving to a farm-based kind of cafeteria model that go beyond the cost, which is kind of an obvious challenge. So we actually had funding to get more local food into our school and it wasn't being used because there was resistance to it. We do have local beef in our cafeteria freezer right now from Badger Brook Farm in Danville, which is where I get a lot of my meat for our class and personally. But they also don't tell the kids when they're serving the local beef. So the kids might be like, whoa, the burger was better today, but they don't know why. And so that lack of that connection, I think, is really holding us back. And I think it's important that we work on that piece of it. But it is really separate from what I'm doing. There's very little interfacing between the folks who cook the lunch and me. And the kids will often say, I just want to eat in your classroom because the food is better here. And then we talk about, how busy the people are who are cooking lunch and how I'm only cooking for 15 people. So it's different. But yeah, no, that's a real challenge. I do think, though, that the kids are cooking a lot more at home. I've gotten emails from a couple of my 7th grade students who have said that they're experimenting more at home. They're doing more cooking at home. One student said she didn't realize that she could experiment with food and change things until my class. That's actually a relative of yours, Lucia.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's having an impact. And I think that's why starting earlier makes a bigger outsized impact. I also prefer teaching high school personally. I like teaching students who have a deeper ability to connect and problem solve. So I view myself as a high school teacher, but I see the importance of teaching the middle schoolers and the elementary kids. And during summer school, I actually teach 1st through 8th grade for 4 weeks. So every single student who's in our summer school, I think it was 120 kids last year, had cooking pretty much every day or at least a couple times a week. So yes, I guess I don't call on you, you call on me. I'm a teacher.
We've been trained. Suzanne, your presentation, your personal stories,
Thanks.
this is sort of a practical question. Because
Sure.
the last year or so, we've talked about how it's usually in a special nutritionist or someone in the school that's passionate about local foods. It becomes the inspiration to growing a culture.
Yeah.
So Danville's fortunate. Where is there specific budget line items for the product to make waffles or every class ends up with an achievement, or most of them do, that can be experienced? How much of your budget is dedicated? And to include the
extra.
the food and the
Mhm.
materials to achieve your goal?
Not enough. So my budget for this year initially, we've found a little bit more, but it was $3,000 for food, which is less than $1 per student per day, which is one of the reasons that it's really easy to end up baking cookies instead of making salads, right? Because, flour is cheap. And so it's really hard to do the kind of thing I'm doing with that type of budget. We were able to take some ESSER funds that we will not have access to after September 30th of next year and move those into my budget. So now my budget for ingredients and other things for my classroom was moved up to 7,000. So that's more like $2.50 per student per day, which is still challenging, but more doable. And because I have a restaurant background, I have access to suppliers that other people wouldn't know about. They might have access, but they wouldn't know to reach out to them. So I used Provisions International to buy 100 pounds of flour the other day, and it's way cheaper than getting it at Marty's. And I buy a lot at Marty's because it's a local store and it's they're supportive of us and of the community. For those of you who don't know, it's a gas station on Route 2 that has like amazing local ingredients folded into its groceries. But yeah, so it's hard and it doesn't quite work. And I'm kind of piecing it together and I need more funding to be able to do what I'm doing well. And so I'll launch into my problem section, which is kind of coming right up. So I know I'm lucky to have a kitchen at all. I have a kitchen with 4 kind of home style stoves, a home refrigerator that's malfunctioning, and not enough pots and pans, kind of inconsistent stuff, no spoons, which helps to teach the students to be really creative. We mix things in pots because we don't have enough mixing bowls. So, there's an element where this actually spurs invention. But it would be nice if we had the equipment that we needed. So I'm working, with decades old refrigerator. My refrigerator ices up and freezes the vegetables and the meats, and then it leaks the ice all over. So it's a challenge. Ovens aren't calibrated. I actually met Henry for the first time at an estate sale where I was trying to find some silverware for my classroom. So I'm grateful for that because that's why I'm here today. We have a school garden with a small hoop house, but we don't have any funds to run the garden in the summer. And so it seems a little futile to plant a whole bunch of stuff and then just have it die once the end of June rolls around. Even though we have awesome people, we struggle to get the cafeteria to include the food. So actually, we've kind of hit on most of my kind of bigger challenges. And because we have a small school that could potentially be consolidated, people don't want to invest, people in the community don't want to invest in our classrooms because they think we're just going to end up, they hope or they think or they believe that we're going to end up moving to either another building, which could be nice, or consolidating. So they don't want to put money into what we're doing. And that goes for the shop and the outdoor education teachers as well, and probably our art teacher and anyone else who could use more facilities and more tools for what they're doing. So that's definitely a challenge. So thoughts about the bill specifically. I think that specifying cooking somewhere in the bill could be useful because I think that's part of the chain and it's not, as far as I know, it's not mentioned in there. So it talks about, farms and it talks about cooking equipment, but it doesn't talk about teaching cooking specifically. And I could be wrong, but I don't think that's in there. So it says fund equipment, resources, training, and materials that will help to educate children regarding farming and increase use of local foods and child nutrition programs. But nutrition programs and cooking classes are different. So I thought it might be good to spell that out in there if that is seemly to do. And knowing how to use the ingredients is a crucial part of them being able to get out of school and be able to cook nutritious meals or prepare for jobs. And so that's something else that we've lost Necky a couple years ago, so we don't have a culinary school in Vermont anymore. And so I think there's this big picture question about, in the past, was Necky bringing a lot of people here who stayed and opened restaurants, worked in restaurants? With the lack of that education, how are we going to have a thriving restaurant community, given that restaurants are really one of the key ways that our products are used and that farms are able to thrive? People come for the restaurants, and I think the farm to table kind of messaging is something that gets people to travel to Vermont to eat here. So how are we going to keep the restaurants thriving? And how are we going to keep the restaurants staffed? And I guess that it's really easy to kind of see the like personal nutrition angle and the using local ingredients at home angle. But I think there's this bigger picture tourism industry kind of question, and just our own enjoyment of being able to go out to restaurants and things like that. That kind of is there too, that I don't see getting talked about a lot. I think in the bill also, it specifies that there's money for field trips to farmers, but I think it would be potentially beneficial to include food manufacturing businesses and processors. So, Cabot, Jasper Hill, cider mills, sugaring operations may or may not also have a farm attached to them, but seeing the whole food system from the farms all the way through the restaurants, I think is really useful. So maybe folding those kinds of field trips in as something that you could budget for would be helpful. I took my kids to the Inn at Berklin, which is a pretty fancy fine dining restaurant in Burke. And the chef, basically for free, because he's hoping to get interns out of it in the future, cooked my students a 3-course lunch. It was 10 students. We calculated on the bus home that it would have been $1,000 lunch if we'd paid for it, which we never would have done. Never would have asked for the money for. But a lot of them, a junior said this was the best field trip he's ever taken in his entire history.
Yeah.
Being in school, they've never been to fancy restaurants. A lot of these kids, they do eat at McDonald's and Subway a lot. And so this opened them up to seeing how local food could be used in a different way than what they'd been exposed to. We invited the chef and the staff that had fed us to our classroom, and we cooked for them. And they gave us a talk about their jobs. The pastry chef came, the chef came, the front of house manager came, and they all told us what they do and what their jobs are like and what they like about them. But the kids had no idea that these are possibilities for work after school. So all these kinds of trips could be integrated into a program that really teaches them the whole food system from the ground up, literally. And I think that would kind of fit in with the wording in the bill about educating children regarding farming and nutrition and sustaining relationships and all of that. And then something that worries me personally is the language about giving priority to schools, districts, or registered or licensed childcare providers that are developing, that are willing to make changes to their child nutrition programs and implementing the Vermont School Wellness Policy Guidelines, which I think are valuable. But if I'm a teacher applying for this, I can't control what the wellness programs or the cafeteria is doing. So I just want to make sure that the funds are potentially available, even if I can't get my school initially on board with some of these other pieces. So that was another thing about the bill that I was curious about. So then some questions that I had. How do we start engaging students at a really young age? I mean, our summer school program does get them when they're 6 or 5. So I feel like I'm able to do that in Danville to some degree. But I know there are a lot of schools that don't have kitchens, that don't have a teacher who's teaching the subject. And I think there could be potentially opportunity to create curriculum maybe at the state level that could be shared or dispersed in some way so that teachers who aren't experts in the subject area could fold this in at every grade level in a grade appropriate way. So that's something that you and I had talked about, but isn't related to this bill specifically. creating interdisciplinary opportunities for kids who are more excited about hands-on classes rather than kind of the sitting in chairs classes. I think that there are lots of different ways to do that, but it's hard to do that under the current kind of teaching buckets that we have. So, I'm not licensed yet. I'm working on that. But once I am, it will be to teach, cooking specifically. And I guess so I have to be able to teach sewing and maybe economics. But I want to teach a class that's food entrepreneurship, where the kids are basically planning a food truck business and they have to find investors, hire staff, test their marketing proposals on other students, plan a menu, execute the menu and change it, and then actually run our school food truck for a day or so. But I'm not a math teacher. And so I have to work with other teachers right now to be able to do interdisciplinary classes. So there's not any kind of category that I fit into. I already don't fit into the teaching kind of home ec category, but we're going to try to squish me into that one. But if I want to expand so that I can teach a food social studies class or a food and literature class, I would have to get a lot of different certifications. And I was hearing that there are some people who have actually gotten all of the endorsements so that they can do that. But that's a long outside of work road that not everyone can engage in.
I don't know, Brian's got a question, and I really hate to cut your presentation short. We're running a little late, and I want to just say hi to Heather Darby, who's waiting in the Zoom room, and just let her know that we are looking forward to your testimony, and thank you for your patience. But Representative O'Brien.
There's another room for you to go up there.
Oh, yeah. Some brain research.
I just wondered, where's the closest tech center, St. John? Do they have a culinary arts
They
program?
do. They have a lot more funding and they have a really beautiful fancy kitchen, and they have a technical culinary arts program. So the last thing I'll say before I leave is that Wendell Berry famously said that eating is an agricultural act. And I also think that growing food is a culinary act, in that everything that's grown is going to be processed and consumed in some way. And so just remembering that cooking is kind of the end result of all of this growing and milking and sugaring that we do is really important in kind of building this curriculum and helping students learn about this. Yeah, thank you. Sorry for being long-winded.
And I am sorry that we weren't able to schedule more time for you. And I'll echo Representative Lipsky. Your story is inspiring to have decided to become a teacher after doing all the other things.
Everything else you can do in the food industry, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll be in touch, and thank you for your suggestions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
So do we need to stop and restart, or can we keep going through the?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.